3 days ago, an F-15 was shot down over Iranian airspace. No government has claimed the pilot. No government has claimed the aircraft. No country has acknowledged a missing aircraft, a missing crew member, or a mission that went wrong over Iran on the night of March 26th. The silence is not confusion, it is policy. And the policy of simultaneous denial, maintained across multiple governments, across allied intelligence services, across military press offices that normally compete to characterize operational events in the most favorable terms available, tells you more about what happened that night than any official statement has or will. When a single government stays quiet about a military loss, the explanation is usually operational security. You do not confirm losses that reveal capability, intent, or the failure of a specific mission before you understand what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. When every government that could plausibly own the aircraft stays quiet simultaneously, the explanation is different. The silence is coordinated. Coordinated silence requires coordination. Coordination requires that the governments involved have spoken to each other, agreed on what will not be said, and collectively decided that the story behind this aircraft is one that cannot be told publicly without consequences none of them are prepared to manage. An F-15 was shot down over Iran. Nobody will say whose it was. The question that answers is not where the aircraft came from. It is what it was doing there that requires everyone involved to pretend it never existed. The Receptors, Part 1. What the silence means. Military aircraft get shot down in combat. Governments acknowledge losses. They do it carefully, on their own timeline, with framing designed to minimize strategic damage. But they acknowledge them. Because the alternative, pretending an aircraft and its crew do not exist, creates problems that sustained denial cannot solve. Families know when a family member does not come home. Base personnel know when an aircraft does not return. The maintenance crews, the mission planners, the intelligence officers who built the targeting package, they know. The circle of people who know is never small enough to guarantee indefinite silence from every direction, which means the decision to maintain coordinated denial across all governments that could plausibly own this aircraft is a decision made with awareness of its cost. Someone made the calculation that the cost of indefinite denial, the eventual leaks, the family notification processes that create records, the intelligence collection by adversaries who know the aircraft went down and are watching for confirmation, is lower than the cost of acknowledging what the aircraft was doing. That calculation is only rational if what the aircraft was doing is genuinely undisclosable, not embarrassing, not politically inconvenient, genuinely, structurally undisclosable. The kind of mission whose acknowledgement changes the legal, diplomatic, or strategic architecture of the conflict in ways that cannot be managed after the fact. 3 categories of mission fit that description. The first is a joint operation involving military personnel from a country not publicly acknowledged as a participant in this conflict. If the F-15 carried crew members from a nation whose involvement in direct combat operations over Iran has not been admitted, and whose admission would trigger consequences in their domestic politics, their alliance relationships, or their legal frameworks governing the use of military force, then the aircraft's nationality is undisclosable because the nationality reveals the participation. The second is an intelligence collection mission against targets whose existence or monitoring cannot be acknowledged. If the aircraft was conducting collection against Iranian nuclear facilities, command and control infrastructure, or weapons programs that the collecting nation has publicly denied monitoring through manned aircraft, because the admission would confirm capabilities, methods, or target sets that carry their own disclosure consequences, then the mission type is undisclosable regardless of whose aircraft executed it. The third is a mission that went wrong in a way that reveals a capability gap or a strategic failure that none of the involved governments can afford to have public. If the aircraft was executing a mission type that was supposed to be survivable, a mission that had been executed previously without loss, that was planned against a threat assessment that underestimated what the aircraft actually encountered, then the loss reveals not just the failure of one mission, but the inadequacy of the threat assessment that authorized it. The coordinated silence suggests at least one of these categories, possibly more than one, and the specific features of what has been confirmed, the aircraft type, the location, the timing, and the identities of the governments maintaining simultaneous denial allow a narrowing of which explanation fits. Darchir, Part 2, the F-15 and what it was built for. The F-15 Eagle and its variants have been in service since 1976. In 5 decades of operational use across multiple air forces and multiple conflicts, the F-15 airframe has never been destroyed in air-to-air combat. That record, undefeated in aerial engagements across 50 years, is one of the most remarkable in aviation history and has shaped the aircraft's reputation as the definitive air superiority fighter of the late 20th century. But the F-15 was shot down over Iran, not in air-to-air combat, by a surface-to-air missile. That distinction matters operationally. The F-15's undefeated air-to-air record reflects its performance in the specific environment it was optimized for: aerial combat against other aircraft, where its radar, its missile complement, its speed, and its maneuverability create an engagement envelope that has proven decisive against every adversary it has faced. Against surface-to-air missile systems, particularly the current generation of Russian-supplied systems that Iran operates, the F-15 has no meaningful stealth advantage. Its radar cross-section is large by modern standards, far larger than the F-35, far easier to track and engage at range. The aircraft relies on speed, electronic countermeasures, and tactical maneuvering to survive in contested airspace. Against an S-400 system operating with current targeting data, those measures provide degraded protection against the 40N6 long-range interceptor that achieved the first confirmed F-35 kill on March 9th. Israel operates 2 primary F-15 variants: the F-15I RAM, a long-range strike variant with 2-seat crew configuration optimized for deep penetration strikes, and the F-15CD in the air superiority role. The F-15I is the aircraft whose mission profile is most relevant to operations over Iran. It carries the range, the payload, and the navigation systems for the kind of deep strike missions that Israel has been executing against Iranian targets. Saudi Arabia operates F-15SA aircraft, the most advanced export variant of the Strike Eagle family, upgraded with AESA radar and modern avionics. Saudi F-15s have been operating in the regional airspace throughout this conflict, though Saudi Arabia's official position on its direct involvement in combat operations over Iran has been carefully managed. The United States operates F-15E Strike Eagles in the region, aircraft that have been used for long-range precision strike missions since the Gulf War and that are stationed at bases throughout the Middle East. American F-15Es have been flying missions in support of this conflict since its opening days, though the specific nature of those missions has not been publicly characterized beyond general statements about regional security operations. 3 countries, 1 aircraft type, all 3 capable of flying the aircraft over Iran, all 3 silent. Part 3, the night of March 26th. What is confirmed about the night of March 26th is fragmentary and comes from sources that are themselves operating with incomplete information. But the fragments that have been confirmed establish a factual baseline against which the silence of the involved governments can be assessed. Iranian state media reported the downing of what it described as an American-made F-15 aircraft at 11:47 p.m. local time. The report included a geographic location in the western Iranian province of Kermanshah, airspace that sits along the approach corridor from Iraqi territory toward Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure further east. Iranian media published imagery described as debris from the downed aircraft. The imagery is consistent with F-15 airframe components, though independent verification of the imagery's authenticity has not been possible. The IRGC Aerospace Force claimed the kill was achieved by an upgraded Bavar 373 surface-to-air missile system, Iran's domestically developed long-range SAM, which Iran's defense ministry has claimed incorporates performance improvements derived from studying S-300 and S-400 system architecture. The Bavar 373 has previously been assessed by Western intelligence as a system with significant capability limitations compared to Russian equivalents. If the Downing claim is accurate, either the Bavar 373's capability has been substantially underestimated, or the system was augmented by Russian-supplied radar or targeting data for this specific engagement. The geographic location of the reported downing is significant. Kermanshah province sits along the most direct approach corridor from Iraqi airspace toward the Fordo nuclear enrichment facility, the Natanz enrichment complex, and the Isfahan nuclear research installations. An aircraft flying from Iraqi territory toward any of those targets would transit exactly the airspace where the Bavar 373 engagement was reported. The timing, 11:47 p.m. local, is consistent with a nighttime penetration mission designed to exploit reduced visual detection probability. It is also consistent with the operational tempo that Israeli and American aircraft have been maintaining throughout this conflict, with strike missions timed to arrive over targets in the hours when Iranian air defense operators are at reduced alertness. No emergency beacon transmission from the aircraft was detected by civil aviation monitoring systems. Either the beacon was disabled as part of the mission profile, the aircraft was destroyed in a manner that prevented beacon activation, or the pilot was unable to activate it. No pilot was recovered by Iranian forces, according to Iranian state media, which typically reports the capture of downed aircrews with significant propaganda value. The absence of a reported capture, given that Iran would have substantial incentive to publicize the capture of a pilot from this aircraft, suggests either that the pilot did not survive ejection, that the pilot is being held without public acknowledgement, or that the aircraft was unmanned, which the F-15 airframe does not support in its current operational configurations. What remains unconfirmed is everything that matters most: whose aircraft it was, what it was doing in that airspace, and why every government that could plausibly have owned it has chosen coordinated silence over the acknowledgement that military losses in active conflict normally require. Part 4. The three governments and their silences. Israel's silence is the most immediately remarkable, given that Israel has been publicly acknowledging other losses in this conflict. The F-35I losses were confirmed, not immediately and not with full operational detail, but confirmed. The acknowledgement of losses serves a purpose for Israel. It provides a basis for requesting replacement aircraft, for explaining operational constraints to allies, and for justifying escalatory responses to the Israeli public. The refusal to acknowledge the F-15 loss, in contrast to the acknowledged F-35I losses, suggests that what makes this loss undisclosable is not the fact of the loss itself, but something specific to this aircraft's mission that distinguishes it from the acknowledged losses. If an Israeli F-15I was shot down while conducting a mission that Israeli government has publicly represented as not occurring, a strike against a nuclear facility that Israel has stated it is not targeting for reasons of international law or alliance pressure, a collection mission that reveals intelligence methods Israel denies using, or an operation conducted jointly with personnel from a country whose participation in the conflict Israel has not acknowledged, then the loss cannot be confirmed without confirming the mission, and the mission cannot be confirmed. Saudi Arabia's silence is structurally different. Saudi Arabia has maintained a public position of non-involvement in direct combat operations throughout this conflict, a position required by its domestic political constraints, its relationships with other Arab League members, and the legal frameworks that govern how Saudi military force can be employed without parliamentary or consultative council authorization. If a Saudi F-15SA was operating over Iran on the night of March 26th, its presence there is inconsistent with the public position Saudi Arabia has maintained throughout the conflict. Saudi involvement in direct strike operations over Iranian territory would represent a significant expansion of Saudi participation beyond what has been publicly acknowledged. It would implicate Saudi Arabia in the conflict in ways that its domestic political architecture and its relationships with other Muslim-majority states could not easily accommodate. The silence is therefore not simply strategic communication management. It is a necessary condition for maintaining the domestic and regional political position that Saudi Arabia's government depends on. American silence is the most consequential of the three. The United States has been the most explicit about the nature of its involvement in this conflict, acknowledging strike operations, acknowledging the presence of carrier strike groups, acknowledging the deaths of American service members. American military press offices have been more forthcoming than Israeli or Saudi counterparts about the operational picture. The refusal to acknowledge this loss, against that background of relative transparency, suggests that the specific circumstances of this aircraft's loss are undisclosable in a way that other losses have not been. An American F-15E shot down while conducting a strike mission that Congress has not authorized, while carrying out operations that the administration has publicly denied conducting, or while operating in a manner that implicates legal authorities the administration has not invoked. Any of those circumstances would make acknowledgement impossible within the current political and legal framework governing American military operations. Part 5. The Bavar 373 question. If the IRGC's claim is accurate, that an F-15 was shot down by a Bavar 373 surface-to-air missile system, the capability implication requires examination, because the Bavar 373 that Western intelligence has previously characterized and the Bavar 373 that apparently shot down an F-15 are not obviously the same system. The Bavar 373 entered Iranian service in 2019. It was developed as a domestic alternative following the cancellation of Iran's S-300 purchase under sanctions pressure. Iran's defense ministry has made capability claims for the system that Western assessments have generally treated skeptically. Claims of engagement ranges and altitude ceilings that would require seeker and propulsion technology that Iran was not assessed to have independently developed. The skeptical assessment of Bavar 373 capability rested on several technical assumptions. That Iran's radar technology could not achieve the detection and tracking performance required for long-range engagement of fast-moving aircraft, that Iran's interceptor guidance technology could not achieve the terminal accuracy required against maneuvering targets at extended range, and that Iran's propulsion technology could not achieve the intercept envelope the system's claimed specifications would require. Each of those assumptions was derived from intelligence collection against Iranian defense industry capability at a specific point in time. Each is a variable that external technical assistance can change. Russian technical assistance to Iranian air defense development has been documented and sanctioned repeatedly. The specific forms that assistance has taken, whether radar technology, guidance systems, propulsion, or software architecture, are not fully characterized in public assessments. If Russian assistance to the Bavar 373 program has been more extensive than assessed, the system's actual performance could exceed the performance that assessments based on Iranian domestic capability alone would project. Chinese technical assistance to Iranian defense programs has similarly been documented, sanctioned, and imperfectly characterized. Chinese radar technology, particularly in the active electronically scanned array domain, has reached performance levels that would substantially improve the Bavar 373's detection and tracking capability if incorporated into the system. The engagement on March 26th, if it occurred as Iran claims, provides the most significant operational data point on Bavar 373 performance that any external analyst has access to. An F-15, presumably equipped with its standard electronic warfare suite and flying a mission profile that its crew assessed as survivable in the threat environment, was shot down. That outcome is inconsistent with the threat assessment that authorized the mission. The inconsistency between the threat assessment and the outcome is the most operationally alarming implication of the March 26th downing, regardless of whose aircraft it was. If the Bavar 373 has achieved performance levels that exceed current Western characterizations, the threat assessment against which every mission over Iran is planned is wrong, and wrong threat assessments get aircraft shot down. Part 6. The Kermanshah Corridor. The geographic location of the reported downing, the airspace above Kermanshah province in western Iran, is not incidental. It is the most direct approach corridor from Iraqi airspace toward three of the most strategically significant target sets in Iran. The Fordo fuel enrichment plant sits approximately 380 kilometers east-northeast of the Kermanshah airspace, where the downing was reported. Fordo is the nuclear enrichment facility that has been the most discussed target in Israeli and American strategic planning, built into a mountain near Qom, hardened against conventional air attack to a degree that requires specialized penetrating munitions for reliable damage, and representing the portion of Iran's nuclear program most resistant to the airstrike approach that has been discussed for 15 years. Fordo cannot be reached from the west, from Iraqi airspace, without transiting the Kermanshah corridor. Aircraft approaching from the Mediterranean, from Israeli territory, from carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf, all face Iranian air defense architecture that makes the Western approach the least heavily defended option for a significant portion of the flight profile. The Western approach through Kurdistan and into Kermanshah brings an aircraft within strike range of Fordo while spending less time inside Iran's most heavily integrated air defense zones. The Natanz enrichment complex sits approximately 500 kilometers east of the Kermanshah airspace. Same approach corridor. Same logic about the relative density of Iranian air defense coverage along the Western approach compared to approaches from the south or southeast. The Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center sits approximately 450 kilometers to the southeast, also approachable through the Western corridor. An aircraft transiting the Western approach through Kermanshah at 11:47 p.m. on March 26th was heading in the direction of targets that are the most discussed, the most strategically significant, and the most operationally challenging in the entire target set that this conflict has been built around. Whether it reached those targets before it was shot down, or whether the shoot-down occurred on the inbound leg before weapons release, is unknown. If it was shot down on the inbound leg, the mission failed and the target it was heading for was not struck. If it was shot down on the egress, the mission may have succeeded, and the government that launched it may be managing the public acknowledgement of the result it achieved alongside the public silence about the loss it sustained. Either scenario has significant implications. A failed mission against Fordo or Natanz is an operational failure in the most strategically consequential domain of this conflict, the domain that every other military operation in this conflict has been designed to enable or to create conditions for. A successful mission against Fordo or Natanz accomplished in a manner that requires indefinite public denial of both the mission and the aircraft that executed it represents a strategic result achieved at a political cost that the involved governments have apparently decided to pay. Part 7. The intelligence that enabled the engagement. Whatever system shot down the aircraft over Kermanshah, the Bavar 373 that Iran claims, or a Russian-supplied system that Iran is declining to identify, or a combination of both, the engagement required targeting data that the shooting system may not have generated independently. An aircraft flying a low observable profile with electronic countermeasures active at night over terrain that provides some radar masking opportunity does not present an easy targeting solution to a surface-to-air missile system, even a capable one. Achieving a successful engagement requires either persistent radar coverage sufficient to build a tracking solution through the countermeasures, or external targeting data fed to the shooting system from a sensor that can see the aircraft when the shooting system's radar cannot. Russia operates surveillance aircraft and satellites that provide radar coverage over Middle Eastern airspace. Russian electronic intelligence collection against the aircraft operating in this conflict has been ongoing since February 28th. Russian AWACS equivalent aircraft, the A-50 and its variants, have been operating from bases in Russia and potentially from Syrian territory during this conflict, providing airborne radar coverage that supplements ground-based radar networks. If Russian collection assets detected the F-15 during its approach through the Kermanshah corridor and provided targeting data to Iranian air defense, either through direct data link to the Bavar 373 battery or through Russian advisors embedded with Iranian air defense units providing real-time engagement support, the engagement becomes explainable in terms consistent with the Bavar 373's domestic capability limitations. Russia's provision of targeting data to Iran for the purpose of shooting down an American, Israeli, or Saudi aircraft is an act with implications beyond the specific engagement. It represents a direct Russian contribution to the destruction of a Western military asset. In the legal and diplomatic framework that governs Russian-American relations, already under extreme stress, it crosses thresholds that the current administration would face significant pressure to respond to if acknowledged publicly. The silence that all involved governments are maintaining may reflect, in part, the assessment that acknowledging Russian targeting assistance for the downing of a Western aircraft creates an escalation dynamic that none of the current players, not Washington, not Tel Aviv, not Riyadh, not Moscow, has calculated they can manage safely within the current conflict's framework. Fires Part 8, The Story That Cannot Be Told. There is an aircraft at the bottom of a mountain in western Iran. There are people who know whose it was, what it was doing, and what happened to the crew. Those people are inside the military and intelligence establishments of at least 2 governments, and possibly 3. They are maintaining coordinated silence. That silence is costing them in the institutional pressure of concealment, in the human cost of whatever happened to the crew, in the operational uncertainty created by not publicly acknowledging a threat assessment failure that other crews are still flying against. The silence is being maintained anyway, which means the cost of disclosure exceeds the cost of concealment in the calculation of the people who made the decision. What disclosure would cost is visible in the structure of the silence itself. If the aircraft was American, disclosure reveals either a combat operation that Congress has not authorized, an engagement with a Russian-assisted targeting system that requires a response, or a mission profile against a target set that the administration has publicly stated it is not pursuing. Any of those disclosures changes the political and legal architecture of American involvement in this conflict in ways that the administration cannot manage within its current framework. If the aircraft was Israeli, disclosure reveals either a mission against nuclear targets that Israel has not acknowledged pursuing, a joint operation with a partner whose involvement Israel is concealing, or a threat assessment failure that calls into question the survivability of continued F-15I operations over Iran at a moment when Israel's F-35I fleet has already been reduced by 21%. If the aircraft was Saudi, disclosure reveals Saudi direct combat involvement over Iranian territory, a fact whose acknowledgement destroys the careful diplomatic positioning Saudi Arabia has maintained throughout this conflict, and implicates Saudi leadership in legal and political accountability that its domestic architecture cannot currently absorb. The silence is maintained because each government's cost of disclosure exceeds its cost of concealment. That calculation is rational in the short term. It becomes progressively more expensive over time as the circle of people who know expands, as families make demands that cannot be indefinitely deferred, as intelligence services from other countries collect evidence that finds its way into reporting that cannot be denied without active contradiction. The aircraft went down on March 26th. The silence has held for 3 days. The pressure against it is building from every direction simultaneously, from the families, from the crews who are flying the same corridors against the same threat assessment, from the intelligence services whose collection is generating a picture that contradicts the official silence, and from the Iranian government whose incentive to demonstrate that it shot down an unacknowledged aircraft only increases as the silence continues. The silence will not hold indefinitely. The story that cannot be told will eventually be told. In pieces, through leaks, through the accumulation of confirmed details that eventually make the official denial unsustainable. When it breaks, the story will not simply be about an aircraft and a crew. It will be about what the aircraft was doing that required every government that could have owned it to pretend it never existed. That story is the one that changes something, not the loss of one F-15, the mission that loss reveals, and the silence that mission required. Subscribe to From Report. Turn on notifications. The analysis continues.